This video is not intended to encourage or glorify any kind of drug use. The sole purpose of these videos is to educate you on the dangers of what these substances can do to you. Please do not do any of the acts mentioned in this video. I repeat, do not do any of the acts mentioned in this video. I am 20 years old. I have had many psychedelic experiences since I was about 15, so has my friend who was with me for this trip. I first tried LSD at 15 and I fell in love with it. Since then, I have taken LSD about 15 more times, as well as several experiences with psilocybin mushrooms, MDMA, 2CB, and once with 2CI. This report is about that 2CI experience. I have always been able to keep a good head even through difficult experiences with psychedelics, and I did manage to hold it together, just about, throughout this trip. I am writing this report as a warning to be extremely careful when dosing research chemicals such as 2CI. If the wrong person takes too much, things can go horribly wrong, as you will see in this story. It was a warm evening in London, and I received a call from a source explaining that he had acquired 2CI recently. My friend and I, let's call him Z, had planned on taking a psychedelic in the day for a few weeks, but had never got around to it. But since today we were both free, we decided to take the opportunity to try 2CI. We had researched 2CI prior to taking it, as we did with every new drug, and had a vague idea of what to expect. It was our first time. So Z and I picked up from our source at around 6:30 p.m. We swallowed one capsule each, supposedly containing 25 milligrams of 2CI at around 6:45 p.m. We knew this was a strong dose, but had heard of people taking it before and figured it would be intense, but manageable. We then made a plan of what we would do for the duration of the trip. We decided to go and sit by the River Thames and take walks up and down the river to keep ourselves occupied. We would then make our way back to my friend's house when we got bored. We sat by the river as the effects began to creep over us. First, we felt quite strong stimulation, similar to amphetamines. My hands shook slightly, and I began to feel this throughout my entire body, although it was subtle. After about an hour, we both began to notice trails as people walked past us, and as we moved our hands in the air. This was cool. After walking around for a couple of hours, we figured that being near roads wasn't fun. It was too loud and it felt dangerous. Our visuals were becoming more intense, so we walked back to where we were originally, sitting by the river. By this point, the grass was swirling around, and we could see geometric patterns all over it. Although it was quite intense, it was really entertaining for the both of us. Around 3 hours into the trip, we were still sitting by the river. It was beginning to get dark. Z was beginning to get paranoid, fearing that we might get robbed sitting where we were, even though the area was particularly safe. I tried to explain that we were safe and that there were lots of other people sitting nearby, so that it was unlikely anybody would rob us here. Regardless, Z's paranoia increased, as well as both of our hallucinations. People's faces began to look quite sinister looking. This was quite frightening. About 4 hours into the trip, and the view of London was extremely colorful. The sky was filled with geometric shapes like a kaleidoscope, changing colors from red to purple to green. The details on the building were moving around, similar to LSD, but slightly more profound. It was extremely intense, the most intense hallucinations either of us had experienced. Flashing colors and sparkles engulfed our vision, making it very difficult to read words or even see the time. Z's paranoia was still increasing, and I decided it was probably best if we try to make our way home. Z didn't like the idea, but I explained that it might reduce some of the paranoia if we left this area. I grabbed him and we began making our way home. Z began saying things along the lines of, music, family, friends, they are so important, and trying to list as many things as he felt were important in life that he could. Z kept turning his back as though he was frightened of going near roads and busy streets. He stopped making sense in what he was saying, completely random phrases. I managed to drag him onto a train. I wasn't sure if this was a good idea, but I was slightly panicking and felt like we had to get out of the busy city. By the time we got onto the train, everything was going crazy, to the point where I could hardly notice what was happening. I could see the reflections of everyone on the train all around me, and they were all staring at us because Z was shouting and freaking out. We got back to Z's hometown and figured we would have to walk to his house. This concept wouldn't process with him, and he began running around the street shouting and screaming. He wanted the trip to end. Completely random thoughts were going through both of our minds. I couldn't make sense of anything. What time is it? What is time? Does time even exist? How long am I going to be like this? Although I was not quite on the same level as Z, I was still very confused and slightly frightened. It got to a point after trying to figure out the best way to get home when Z insisted I called an ambulance. He explained how on the train he saw himself die and that he saw his throat get cut. This freaked me out a bit, but I tried to make light of it and explained how it was just a hallucination. This didn't make him feel any better. He wanted it to stop, and I was beginning to agree. I called an ambulance. The ambulance arrived and took Z away. Another one came to get me. I didn't see Z for about 4 hours after the ambulance came. I got to the hospital and was made to sit in the waiting room. The patterns on the floor were moving around like crazy, very much like the scene in Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas where Raoul Duke is in the hotel after taking LSD. This was great. I was still in a confused headspace and my thoughts were completely random and looping, which was kind of scary, but the visuals kept me entertained before they hooked me up to their machines and took a blood sample. I was paranoid of the doctors and questioned their reasons for taking my blood, but I just accepted what was happening and let them continue. I was okay and not in any particular danger, but they kept me in for a couple of hours. Eventually Z came and found me. He said we could leave and that we never needed to be here in the first place. I agreed. He seemed to have calmed down a lot, so I figured we could spend the rest of the trip at his house, relaxing. We walked home from the hospital. During the walk, Z began to lose the ability to talk. The trees are made of loads of tiny squares, but as he finished a sentence, he would stop on the last word and hum it, as though something was stopping him from saying it. He blamed it on the squares that everything was made up of. This continued getting worse until he could hardly speak anymore. We arrived back at his house. I was ready to chill out until we sobered up, although my thoughts were still confused and looping. I didn't really want to talk much, so I just agreed with everything Z said about the squares and how he could feel the nerves in his body. It did make sense. He wasn't talking complete nonsense, or so it seemed at the time. He was really enjoying himself at this point. Z's mind was clearly racing. Everything he thought, he said, or tried to say, and his inability to speak seemed to be getting worse. I began to get a bit worried. Z decided to roll a spliff. Bad idea. It was about 7 a.m. We started smoking the spliff, which began making my mind race even more. Then, he suddenly jumped up, went rigid, and collapsed through his living room table. He began to fit and his face turned blue and gray. I freaked out and tried to calm him down. He wasn't responding. I was forced to call another ambulance. I thought he was going to die. I was running around frantically trying to find the address for the ambulance. I was struggling to stay calm. My mind was going crazy. What have we done? Is he going to die? Fuck. The ambulance arrived. Z was sitting upright now, but he was completely out of it. He couldn't remember his name. His eyes were empty holes. He couldn't communicate with the paramedics. I tried to explain the situation as well as I could, but I was in a bad state. In the ambulance, Z started freaking out and trying to escape, and they were forced to strap him down to the stretcher. He couldn't give the paramedics any details, his mother's phone number, or even his mother's name. We arrived at the hospital and I sat in the waiting room, again. I could hear Z screaming and shouting in the room nearby. He was paranoid that the nurses were trying to access his mind with all the wires they had attached to him, and he began to pull them out. You can't do this. It isn't legal. You can't use this in court. I'm going to sue. As well as a lot of complete nonsense. Security was brought in to keep him from escaping. He was going psychotic. It reminded me of the Jefferson Street incident. Eventually, I was hooked up to another machine. This time, I was freaking out more, seeing my friend going so insane. I thought he was going to lose his mind forever. I couldn't think about the situation rationally. I lay in the bed trying to sleep it off, but I couldn't. I still felt very stimulated, and I was hallucinating quite a lot. The floor still looked amazing. The doctors were confused that I hadn't reacted the way Z had, even though we had taken the same drug. By about midday, I was told to go home as I was safe. The last thing I heard was that they had given Z about 25 milligrams of diazepam and it wasn't working. I went home. I assumed that they would get him to sleep eventually and he would wake up later, either completely fine or completely insane. I lay in bed until about midnight. I watched about 5 movies as I couldn't bear the silence as my thoughts were freaking me out. I was worried about Z. Is he ever going to be the same again? I couldn't stop thinking about seeing him fit. It was horrible. I went on the computer once I figured that I wasn't going to be able to sleep. It was about 2 a.m. and Z came online. He had self-discharged and was at his friend's house. I was relieved. He was okay. Let me start by saying it has taken me a few days to process what I have experienced. I have been a regular marijuana smoker for about 3 years. Having only recently delved into psychedelics, I never even heard of ego death or any such phenomena until after I went through this. I originally wanted to use psychedelics mainly for visual pleasure. This experience was very, very intense for me, and I wanted to write this report so that people are aware that this can occur on 4-HO-MET. During the past few months before my experience, I had tried 4-HO-MET approximately 5 times at 20 milligrams and 40 milligram doses. The first few experiences were fairly pleasant and similar to one another. I saw spinning, shifting patterns in the surfaces around me, experienced music more intensely, and saw different colors and lights on surfaces. It lasted around 4 to 6 hours and was mild enough that I could still make conversation and walk around. I enjoyed it as I am a very visual, artistic person. If it hadn't been for the trip I'm about to describe, I probably would have continued using 4-HO-MET. I'm a fairly regular marijuana smoker, about 2 to 3 bowls per day. I smoked a few joints each time during these first few times with no issues. I also have a prescription for Xanax and Ativan as needed from my doctor that I keep nearby while tripping just in case. This particular time, I took 4-HO-MET on a beautiful Friday evening. My partner and I had planned a trip that night. I had abstained from eating for about the past 6 hours before. I was in a happy, excited mood. It had been over a month since I last tripped, so I decided to take a small dose just to be cautious. I took a 20 milligram capsule of 4-HO-MET with a glass of water at about 7:30 p.m. About 10 minutes after ingesting, I was already seeing swirly patterns in our kitchen floor, and I felt a little lightheaded. I realized that I was coming on very quickly compared to my previous experiences. However, I wasn't alarmed. It was still pleasant, and I was excited to see more patterns. I went outside with my partner, who is much more experienced with psychedelics, and we sat in our backyard and smoked a joint. While sitting there, I started seeing geometric, twisting, dancing patterns in the grass and trees around us. I remarked that it looked so pretty outside that it almost looked fake. I felt very nauseous and my stomach was in pain. When I stood up, I felt as if I could barely walk. I had vertigo pretty badly. The effects of the 4-HO-MET took hold very quickly and powerfully. As I stood in our backyard, I started walking around slowly to try to calm myself and get my bearings. Patterns were swirling and changing in all the surfaces around me, and the swirls were going very fast. I remember looking at our yard and seeing a robin hopping around, but I couldn't remember what the creature was called. It was then that I realized I no longer remembered certain words. I was a bit alarmed at this, but I tried to keep it to myself and wrote it off as part of the trippiness. I was still feeling very lightheaded and faint. As I stood outside, I realized that the world looked different. It was no longer simply the swirls and patterns that I had come to expect with 4-HO-MET. It had suddenly shifted to something entirely different. The only way I can think to explain it is that the world looked as if it had doubled over with a clear glass copy of itself. Everything looked very shiny, mirror-like, glistening, glossy, and huge. There was a dome-like sensation I had when looking around, as if there was a huge, clear mirror-windowed globe somehow covering the Earth, very close to Earth's surface. This looked very, very real to me, and was unlike anything I had ever seen before. I was extremely nauseous and faint at this point. I don't know what time it was, but I believe less than 1 hour had passed. Words were no longer coming to me easily, and I couldn't really describe what I was seeing or feeling to my partner. I stumbled into the bathroom where I noticed the floor swirling, which usually happens when I trip, but it was going extremely fast. Then I saw a beam of rainbow light across my arm, like some sort of laser bracelet. Nothing like that had ever happened before, so I had a feeling something weird was definitely happening at this point. As I was washing my hands, I sniffed the soap I was using. I'm fond of nice scented soaps, and realized I truly could not remember if I thought the smell of soap was pleasant or unpleasant. I suddenly felt like a newborn baby who doesn't know the basics of the world. Is soap a good smell? It seems like a basic question, but I somehow didn't know. When I came out of the bathroom, the world was still all glowy, mirrory, and huge looking. I was not seeing patterns at all at this point, but rather just seeing this golden clear shimmery light all around, and feeling the sensation that everything was this huge dome around me. I kept glancing around the room, hoping to make the dome feeling go away, but it didn't. I closed my eyes hoping for some closed-eye visuals to relieve me, but I still saw everything that I saw with my eyes open. Now I was very frightened. I couldn't escape this weird glowy shiny dome world. This was nothing like the 4-HOMET I had tried before. I tried remembering facts about myself, like the name of the street I grew up on, but nothing was coming to mind. It was like I had lost all of my memories, like all of my personality and memory was just blank. I sat on the floor of our living room while my partner laid on the couch watching the clouds through the window. I was feeling very uncomfortable and uneasy. I kept glancing around waiting for the feeling and weird visuals to pass. My mind felt troubled, blank, and scared. We had music playing and a song came on that I knew was sad and significant to me in some way, but I couldn't remember why I thought it was sad. I no longer had any connotations with the song. I knew the song had once been meaningful to me, and it freaked me out that I couldn't remember why. I started feeling extremely upset. I finally was so scared and freaked out that I asked my partner if he thought this batch was okay because it felt like a totally different drug to me. At this point, I was nearing panic. He assured me it was the same and that he had taken from the same batch. I started crying uncontrollably. I tried to explain to him how everything felt weird and scary, but since I didn't have my memory working properly, I couldn't really explain it. I couldn't remember words. I felt that I was losing my mind. I started thinking, what if I was stuck in this state forever? If my memories were gone forever? If I could no longer communicate? And I started hyperventilating and panicking. It turned into a full-blown panic attack. I was barely able to breathe. My heart was racing so fast it physically hurt my chest. My partner asked me if I wanted it to stop and brought me one of my 0.25 milligrams Xanax. Immediately after that, I also took 0.5 milligrams of Ativan as well because the panic was so strong. I thought I was experiencing psychosis or a seizure or something. I thought I was going to need to go to the emergency room. As the Xanax started to take effect, I was able to breathe again. I took many deep, slow breaths. I somehow remembered enough words to ask my partner if this feeling would go away, and he reassured me that the trip would only last a few more hours. I kept asking him questions to try to understand the situation I was in, and then not being able to remember what I had asked mere seconds later. I felt disconnected from the world around me, like an entity locked in another dimension. I felt the absence of myself, like my soul was gone, or had ceased being, and like some universal blank soul was now inside of me. I didn't know who I was. I felt like I had lived other lives in the past, like my soul was traveling, or like my soul didn't belong solely to me. It was an extremely disorienting, strange, indescribable feeling. My partner helped me into the bedroom and we laid down together. Tears were streaming down my face. The anxiety medications had calmed me physically, but my brain was still in this strange, no memory, no personality state. It felt like I was in a coma, looking out at the world. I could perceive everything around me, but it had no connotation, no backstory, or no memory or emotion. Everything was still all golden and shiny and huge looking. I kept sitting up and looking around the room because it felt like the walls were closing in on me, like the room/dome thing was getting closer, which made me feel panicked again. As we laid there with the sunlight of the early evening streaming into the room, I felt very clearly that I was dying, that this was my deathbed, the last conscious moment of my life. I had no memories, no past. I looked over at my partner, but I no longer knew his face. I knew, though, that I was safe. I started feeling overwhelming gratitude and love for him. At this point, I had no memories of my life or self. It felt like truly this would be the last moment of my life, and that I would die in this blank, shimmery, shiny world around me. I don't remember coming out of that state. I know that I did come out of it, and that my partner and I sat on the couch, watched a little TV together, and fell asleep normally. I remember being exhausted. The next day I was tired, weak, and my mind felt foggy, but I felt extremely grateful to have my brain and memories functioning again. It felt like I had come back from near death. My partner explained that it sounded like I experienced ego death, and I started reading up on what I had experienced. This trip was unexpected, overwhelming, completely foreign to my other experiences with it, but it was very, very real and very intense. I personally would never seek out this experience again. I was 17 years old and I had watched a lot of porn on XTube when I first discovered poppers. Usually during watching these encounters, I had seen both the guys and girls inhaling something from a small bottle in their videos. I would also like hearing them edge each other on, continue sniffing poppers while they were having sex, encouraging others to have longer and harder sniffs. It was 2012 when Reddit was only used by nerds before there was such a poppers boom outside the gay community. I ordered some poppers online. I didn't know any gay people doing poppers in the small town I grew up in, so I didn't know anybody in real life who knew about it. I read the risks and side effects online. I read that poppers are one of the safest drugs there are. They would be much safer than alcohol in comparison. Common side effects would include headaches, and if you drink them, you get methemoglobinemia, a serious emergency condition. They wouldn't be physically addictive, and the psychological addiction would just be a disinterest in sex without poppers. So I thought, doesn't sound too dangerous, let's try. Shortly after I started huffing poppers for the first time back in 2012, I noticed severe health issues. I had chronic headaches, so strong I wasn't able to study at all. As a high school student who had their last exams a few months later, this was an issue. I also had a very loud ear ringing, or also called tinnitus, which I didn't link to poppers usage until 2021 when I read a story from another guy who had this right after they started huffing poppers. On my left ear, it is a dark humming. On my right ear, a high-pitched beeping. I wasn't able to sleep. I've been to many doctors, to a neurologist, and even did an MRI in 2013. The MRI didn't show any tumors or any other diseases. Not a single doctor was able to help me. My high school degree was fucked because I wasn't able to concentrate. My tinnitus is unchanged, even after 9 years. But I didn't sniff that much, honestly. Maybe one 9ml bottle per month. My life sucked suddenly. I lacked motivation. I had fatigue. However, I thought it might be the lack of vitamin B12. This indeed can cause such issues. Poppers destroy your red blood cells, and to produce them, your body needs iron, vitamin B12, and folic acid. That's why you should really supplement all these three if you sniff poppers. Make a blood test with these things if in doubt. I started university. In my country, you can study a few majors with a bad high school degree. I usually slept during class, as I still lacked motivation and had strong fatigue. I was still huffing poppers because I didn't link my health issues to them. I didn't manage to learn enough, though. I postponed some exams to the next semesters, which I failed 3 times in the 7th semester finally, and by this, I dropped from the university. Poppers made me dumb and unable to concentrate. I didn't pass exams anymore. I dropped from university in 2016. I stopped poppers in 2016 right after I had an overdose. My leg muscles became so weak I wasn't able to hold my body anymore. I fell on the floor with my shoulders, and it's a big surprise I am still alive. Had I fallen the radiator 10 centimeters away from my head, I would have bled to death in my single apartment. I told myself, this was it. I start a new life as long as I'm able to. I threw all my poppers away. I was 21 and I changed everything in my life. I moved to my best friend's flat and they supported me a lot, and I still can't put into words how thankful I am for their support. I was looking for new universities or colleges to start studying again. I also thought about an apprenticeship as universities seem to be too complicated. I tried studying again, but wasn't able to. I didn't understand simple stuff, wasn't able to concentrate, and my memorizing skills sucked ass. At the age of 22, I finally found a partner for the first time in my life and moved in with her. I lost a lot of weight during my addiction. She helped me gain weight and cooked for me. My depressions, withdrawals, and anxieties were so strong. I didn't do groceries, didn't cook, and couldn't even make a toast or sandwich. My BMI was 16. Years later, in 2018, I found a harm reduction subreddit that gave you instructions on how to create your own poppers, and discouraged buying store-bought poppers as they said you can't trust the manufacturers about which alkyl nitrite actually is in the bottle. You honestly don't know if it's pentyl, amyl, isobutyl, or propyl. The poppers you can buy tend to give you nasty side effects like annoying headaches or a weird feeling in your throat. It's usually because the alkyl nitrite is degraded and broke down to alkyl nitrates, nitrogen oxides, and other stuff that you don't want to sniff. That's why you should never inhale just after opening the bottle, especially not if you heard a hissing sound when opening it. I started making my own poppers professionally with expensive equipment. It was not until 2021 that I realized my neurological issues were caused by poppers by Googling for poppers muscle twitching and finding out that I was not the only person with these issues. I was also able to link many issues directly to poppers. The ear ringing / tinnitus I had in 2013, shortly after sniffing poppers, I didn't link to them until now. I also looked up my diary and read about my concentration issues back in 2013 and the assumption that poppers caused them. I was also able to link the tremors that I already had all the way back then. We assumed it would have been just the lack of vitamin B12 that poppers caused in the first place. However, I understood it's not about the vitamins. It's 2021, I am 26 and still wrecked, not even able to work half-time. I still suffer from a loud, annoying tinnitus, muscle twitching. I barely have any motivation. I mostly lie around and see days passing, still fatigue, still wasted every day. I would have never done poppers had I known they can cause such severe neurological problems. I didn't do any hard drugs. I smoked pot here and there and drank a bit of alcohol at parties, but I never had any other drug addictions. The problem is that there's not a lot of information online linking these issues together. It was only after I discovered this website that I was able to make the link between them, and then more and more things fell into place. I knew I fucked up about 2 minutes after I chugged my pre-workout drink. My heart was racing faster than I'd ever felt in my life. My face was pouring with sweat, and I started to feel very anxious and nauseous. My friend was honking his horn in the driveway to hurry me up so he could go to the gym. I decided to ignore how I was feeling and just go with my friend, so I hopped in the car, and off we went. As we're driving to the gym, I realize with the absolute certainty that something is definitely wrong. I think I mixed caffeine in my drink instead of creatine, man. I don't feel right. I mixed 5 grams of that shit. My friend, ignoring the panic in my voice and refusing to take me seriously, tells me to relax and we continue to the gym. We usually mess around with each other and always take things too far, so it wasn't a ridiculous thing to assume I was joking. In a final attempt to try and convince myself that everything is okay, I decided to just go to the gym and to work out whatever is wrong with me. We get to the gym, I swipe my card, and I head straight to the squat rack. At this point, I am able to squat 225 pounds for about 6 to 8 reps after a good warm-up and stretch, but I was way too anxious to even think about doing any of that. Instead, I go and set the bar up with 225 pounds. My heart begins to race faster, but I ignore it and go on to squat my normal 225 pound weight for over 30 reps, an absolutely unthinkable number. There was no struggle in my effort. I just went up and down until my legs were numb. I couldn't feel anything below my waist. I put the bar back and paused for a moment. My heart rate is pumping so fast now that I am genuinely concerned. I may be having a heart attack. I can't lie to myself any longer. I took caffeine. I know I did, and I need to get it out of my body. I sprint to the change room to purge myself of the caffeine and make myself puke. I throw open the door and look for a free stall, only to find them all occupied. With no other option, I bend down to the nearest urinal, stick my finger down my throat, and throw up what looks to be fluorescent orange bile. My friend comes into the bathroom to find me with my head in a urinal filled with vomit and piss. It's obvious now that I am not joking around and am in serious trouble. He tries to calm me down, but there's nothing he can do. He tells me to wait and gets a representative from the gym to see if they can help. The rep offers to get me an ambulance, but my anxiety is growing more and more out of control, and the thought of being wheeled away in a gurney only makes it worse. I shake my head, tell them no, and leave the gym with my friend. I asked him to drive me to the hospital. My friend, being the considerate and kind person he is, tells me that he has an appointment to go to and can only drive me halfway. It's the middle of winter in Toronto, and my friend drops me off 20 minutes away from the hospital. It's snowing outside, and the sidewalk and roads are covered in gray slush. This is as bad a situation as I have ever been in. I begin my walk to the hospital with my 2 fingers on my pulse. My heart is pounding harder and harder, and it physically hurts at this point. The more I walk, the faster my pulse gets, and the more it hurts. I'm starting to panic and don't know what to do, so I opt to get on all fours, sling my gym bag around my neck, and begin crawling in hopes that I can reduce my heart rate. As I crawl to the hospital, I start to feel a tingling in my body and notice that the gray slush I've been trekking through has turned into a vibrant purplish green color. The cars whizzing past me on the road are no longer making noise. Instead, the sounds they're making have turned into waves of different colored light that are enveloping me and dancing all around until they have consumed the whole sky. I am tripping like I just took 2 tabs of LSD. Despite my hallucinations, I finally make it to the hospital where I'm told to sit down and wait. I'm not hallucinating as much, but the walls around me are breathing and the floor is swaying from side to side. After about 20 minutes, I see a doctor who begins to do a number of different tests on me. He asks me how much caffeine I consumed, and I tell him that I dissolved 5 grams into some juice and chugged it in about 10 seconds. The doctor turned around and stared at me with utter shock. "You consumed the equivalent of 50 cups of coffee in under 10 seconds. You should be dead. Your fast metabolism saved you. Any normal human being with a slower metabolic rate would be dead right now. You are incredibly lucky to be alive." There wasn't much the doctor could do for me. The caffeine was in my system. I had thrown up a large amount of it, and my metabolism had saved me from a possible death. "Continue to drink water. Try and rest up," the doctor insisted. So I went home to rest, but it was impossible. I didn't sleep for 3 days. To this day, I haven't taken any pre-workout or supplements, and I haven't had a cup of coffee since. I'll start this off with an experience report I wrote right after my first time taking the substance, in which I suffered the negative consequences of this drug. The first time, I only took a measly 0.5 milligrams of this substance. Afterwards, I'll talk about my second negative experience. Both of these were only a week apart and show the truly dangerous side of this new research chemical. Hopefully this report will teach people to be very careful with this new substance and all new substances. Part 1 is essentially a comedy compared to Part 2. Part 2 is far more serious. Part 1. Lo and behold, my Clonazolam had finally arrived. Perfect timing. I thought I'd go back home, take one, and get a decent day's sleep. I generally sleep from around 5 or 6 to 1 to 2. So I get home and immediately open the bottle and take one single 0.5 milligram pill, advertised as 0.7 to be exact. I then sat on my computer, waiting for the effects to kick in so I could drag myself into bed finally and get some rest. I'd ordered these pills so that I could sleep whilst going through alcohol withdrawals. My longtime girlfriend and I had recently broken up as well, so I figured I'd take the edge off of that. Sadly, my day did not go quite as planned. As the effects kicked in, I decided it was a great time to go for a cigarette. Now, this is where shit hits the fan. I go outside to find I only had one cigarette left. Even though I was feeling very inebriated from just a single one of these little pills, I decided it'd be a great idea to drive into town and buy another pack of smokes for later. I had totally forgotten about wanting to sleep at this point. So I hop in my car, turn it on, and head to the store. I was still dressed in my night garb, a pretty strange outfit, with ruffled hair and one sock off. I walked into the gas station and the lady immediately noticed my inebriation. She told me I need to go get shoes before I would be allowed to buy the pack of cigarettes. What? This had never happened before at this place. Never had this lady been this rude to me. I pleaded with her to sell me them quickly and I'd be out, as I didn't want to drive all the way back for some shoes. She told me no, and that I needed to leave. So, in my benzoed state of mind, I decided it'd be a great idea to push this situation even further. I took the packaging from the mail I just received and stuck one foot in it. The other I stuck in an old envelope. Honestly, I don't remember what I used for the other shoe. I have quite a few blanks at this point. I stormed back in and demanded she sell me the cigarettes, raising my feet and saying, "See? Shoes!" She obliged. As I was driving home, 3 cops pull up behind me and follow me all the way back to my house. Right as I was pulling in my driveway, all 3 of them turn on their lights. Fuck. I pull into my driveway and stop. One of them gets out and walks up to my car. "Sir, have you been drinking today?" he asked. Keep in mind, it's around 1 p.m. Definitely not a normal time for your average person to be drinking. "Most definitely not, sir," I replied in the most upright manner I could. He immediately told me to get out of the car and place me in handcuffs. He told me the lady at the gas station had notified them that an intoxicated individual was rampaging inside of her store and had driven off in a car. I told him I hadn't taken anything and I would submit to any blood, breathalyzers, or even a field test. For some reason, I pulled it off and they performed none of these. However, the reason they had immediately put me in cuffs was because, apparently, I had forgotten about a traffic ticket a few months ago and had never shown up for my court date. The officer asked to search my car, and in my fucked state of mind, not wanting to draw any more attention to my obvious inebriation, I said yes. They found my one-hitter in the car and confiscated it. I was hauled off to county jail over 40 minutes from my house. The ride felt like nothing. I barely remember it, but I remember it being the shortest 40 minutes of my life, almost falling asleep in the back seat. I then spent the next 8 or so hours in jail. However, it literally felt like an hour. Lucky for me, the cop gave me a break since I was so cooperative and only gave me a charge for the paraphernalia, not even for the resin inside it. Even if he did try and charge me with the DUI, there would be no way to prove it in court, so I got saved there when they decided not to perform any tests on me. Overall, this whole incident should only cost me around $200. Even though I had plenty of memory lapses, I wasn't slurring my words or any of that jazz, just a little loopy and definitely buzzed. Definitely quite a bit of euphoria from this stuff, completely took the edge off of the alcohol withdrawal. Part 2, and it just keeps going. I'll keep the last part short. Me and my ex-girlfriend went ahead and talked things out. She had recently cheated on me, but in my state of mind, I was up to 2 to 3 pills a day at this point. I figured life goes on. We were chilling at my house with her friend when we decided to have another night of benzo binging. She had been taking Xanax regularly for the week after we broke up, so I figured she'd have a high tolerance. I was already on 3 pills when she started dosing. Things are a huge blur this night, but one thing sticks out in mind. I told her repeatedly to not take my car and drive home, over and over again. She was very persistent. She was very worried about her daughter, and late at night her mother had sent her a text telling her that she had a bad feeling and would like her to come home. At around 8 in the morning, we had one more talk about it. At this point, I passed out. She decided, oh, why not take his car now? Long story short, she took the car, wrecked it off the side of the road, and ended up in jail. I had pills and weed in the car, and she got busted with both. She received multiple felony charges. When she got to the hospital, she was completely passed out. The doctors did a brain scan to see if she was still alive, and they thought her brain had been shut off for 12 hours. They called her parents and broke the news that their daughter had passed away. When they wrote the police report and in the hospital records themselves, they mentioned she'd been sitting in the ditch for around 12 hours before they found her because they couldn't understand just how the brain could shut off in this way, especially since all a blood test showed was marijuana. They attempted to pointlessly revive her with the machine at the hospital, giving her damage to her heart. She woke up 2 days after the incident. She then spent the next 2 weeks in jail waiting for a bail hearing. If her charges go through, which there's a strong chance they won't, according to her lawyer, she'll be on felony probation for 5 years. I've since talked to her, and her memories of the night are very askew. It's like she started dreaming as soon as the pills kicked in. Apparently, I was speaking in backwards and chopped up sentences, and right before she left, she thought I had told her she'd be fine if she drove my car home. She also thought she had left my house at around 1 a.m., around when her mother texted her. I don't know if what she said was bullshit or not, but I believe it. Please, if you decide to use this substance, 1 pill is all you need. This drug slows the brain's functioning to the extent that you are considered clinically dead. I have no idea how many pills we all consumed that night, but I was knocked out completely until around 6 p.m. the next day. 1 milligram of this substance could easily be considered at least a Xanax bar, if not 2. It also lasts twice as long. I will never touch this stuff again as long as I live. The withdrawal was hell, worse than Xanax for sure, and lasted for a couple weeks. The worst was over in about 5 to 6 days. Severe nerve pain and paranoia. I was convinced an invisible entity was trying to take my life for a week straight. I had audio hallucinations and a severe increase in HPPD. I made a full recovery, however, and do not think there were any permanent after effects. I want to provide a quick background. These M30s, blues, jeans, dirty perks, etc. are pressed with an unknown amount of fentanyl. I don't know how much fent is in each pill. Some have more fent than others, so overdose potential is high. Most people cut off a small part of the pill, 1/8 or so, to test it out, but this can be unsafe as the fentanyl is not always evenly distributed throughout the pill. Again, this shit is potent. What I do, especially when I started back with no opiate tolerance at all, is crush up the pill completely, shake the fine powder in a bag to make sure it's all mixed, then I snort a little bit to feel how strong this pill is. I started using drugs when I was 14, in 2018 where the scene was much different. I come from an upper middle class family. Back then, prescription opiates were much easier to acquire and much cheaper than they are now. My former drug of choice was Oxy. It was easy to use as no one expected this Indian girl to be like this. I stopped opiates at 14 when I overdosed in front of my little brother. Fast forward to now, overdosed multiple times, been addicted to coke, Xans, meth, etc. I've been to rehab multiple times, been sober for multiple months, relapse, got sober again, etc. I'm 17 in my last year of high school with a 4.3 GPA going to a great college. School-wise, was a very functional addict. Out of rehab, sober for a month and a half, I met Jay. Jay is a fentanyl addict, been sober for 9 months, out of jail. Our drug use connected us. We decided to pick up Fent one day. I don't think there's anything off about my mindset. I was decently happy, dating this dude. Parents trusted me a lot. I was nervous because I know how deadly this drug is. I want to say fentanyl has traumatized me. I've seen those take their last breaths in front of me because of this drug, lost countless friends because of this drug, but I still did it. I felt like I was on a cloud. Not that much euphoria compared to Oxy, but I felt like I was wrapped in a warm blanket. It was heavenly. My eyesight was fucked, but I relaxed and enjoyed it instead of feeling nauseated. An hour later, I came down and started to feel more tired, but I didn't mind. I didn't care about anything. I wanted to redose, but Jay warned me against it. I craved it immediately. As he dropped me home with around 5 more pills, I immediately went to my bedroom and did another small line. Again, amazing. I melted into the bed. I told myself when I ran out of the pills I would stop. It would be my little experiment. I was high every single second of every day. Family dinners, nodding out, slurring my words, but fuck if I care. My 12-panel drug test was negative. I lost the dude I was dating because I scared him off. No one knew what I was doing because I knew they would freak out. They care about me, but I didn't care. In fact, this drug has made me into the most selfish person I know. I know one slip up and I die like that, leaving a grieving family and friends. I hate life without it. I ran out 2 days ago. Withdrawals are nothing compared to the obsession I have of getting more. So far, I came close to overdosing once, but I'm still fine. I know this drug is going to be the death of me, and I do not care. In 2 weeks, I went from a recovering drug addict with hopes and ambitions to someone who has no interest in life. I wish on everything I never did fentanyl. I have plans to pick up tomorrow. My ex-boyfriend D, who is one of my closest friends, stopped talking to me over something I did on this drug. I hurt him and annoyed him. I miss him so much. I miss who I was before this. In conclusion, everyone is different. I struggle with addiction and mental health issues. Addiction is bad no matter the substance, but fentanyl is a new level. I feel so frustrated right now. Every inch of me wants to stop this, but I can't. I hope I make it out.